Hi there, and welcome to today's conversation where we chat with Sam Halliwell, who is an endometriosis coach and the founder of the Embodied Alchemy Method. So, we do talk about one of these kind of hidden illnesses, one of these really not fully yet explored, studied research issues for women called endometriosis. And we talk with Sam, who has personally suffered from it, who has been through a lot of trying to heal herself through traditional medicine with surgeries and lots of things going on, but also then figuring out and learning so much by herself about neuroscience and energy and emotions to figure out and navigate her own experience to then figure out the connection between the body, emotions, and nervous system. So this is a beautiful blend of scientific conversation, the medical conversation, but also emotional and neuroscience in there. So it's the perfect blend of what we love here on the podcast with personal stories and practical tips and tips. So let's go into this conversation with Sam.
But before we jump into this conversation, here is your reminder. Hit that subscribe, like and share this episode because I think this episode is a really important episode and women need to hear this episode. So please do share it with all your colleagues, friends, and any women and females you have in your life because we never know where these conversations will lead and who they can help. So hit that subscribe, like, and share, and do hit that notification button so that you get notified whenever we upload a new episode. But now let's get into this really informative episode for you.
Hi, Sam. Welcome to the show. How are you today?
I'm really good, thank you. How are you?
All good. So excited to dive into this conversation. But before we get started, I would love to know a little bit more about you, who you are, what you do, give us and our listeners a little bit of a teaser into what this conversation may actually be all about.
Yeah, sure. So, my name's Sam. I'm based in the UK, but I work with people worldwide. I'm an endometriosis coach, so I help women move beyond just managing symptoms. And a lot of what I do then is about reconnecting with the body in a way that feels really supportive rather than constantly fighting a battle. My work is rooted in my own experience. I spent years dealing with really painful periods, being dismissed and gaslit by doctors, going through treatments that didn't resolve what was happening for me, multiple surgeries, fertility issues, you name it, physical, emotional, mental, justness, and I got to a point where I felt like nothing was ever going to happen and work. I then had a series of events that were sort of coincidental and not intentional, but that resulted in me having a very big difference in my own endo symptoms and how that was showing up. From there, because I'm quite a nerd, if you like, and quite geek out on things, I dove into, well, if this is working for me, would it work for other people? And that's where it started, really. Started, experimenting with willing friends and family who had similar issues. They were having the same sort of results and changes that I had. And that's where I built this methodology that I now bring to clients, helping them with their endo symptoms. And it also then ripples out, because it's whole body, ripples out beyond the disease itself into daily life, and how how life is showing up for them can be so different and much more aligned with what they want.
And for those listeners who might not be fully familiar with what endometriosis actually is, could you just give us a little bit of a insight into, what might be the symptoms, what is this about, how and why it's often being misdiagnosed, why the doctors kind of tend to overlook this issue and go into different directions, so we can then really start building into what you've learned, your methodology, but give us a little solid understanding of what this condition actually is.
Of course. So endometriosis itself is when cells that are similar to the lining of the uterus, similar is an important word there because it's not the same. So these cells that are similar end up somewhere else in the body that they're not supposed to be. And as for where in the body, literally anywhere. Usually it tends to be around the organs that are in that sort of stomach area. So fallopian tubes, ovaries, bladder, bowel, a lot of the stuff that's there. But it can be literally anywhere. It's been found in people's lungs, their brain, it's on their skin, like you name it, it's been found there. So these cells then that are somewhere else, because they are similar to that uterine line and they respond in the same way to the hormonal cycle that we experience as women, but because they are neither the correct makeup nor in the correct location, they're responding in a way that means that it isn't natural. So they are increasing in size, they are having hormonal reactions and responses in a place that doesn't come away, whereas the uterine lining, which is designed to come away every single month as part of our menstruation cycle, these other cells can't do that because they are not where they're supposed to be. And it causes then a whole range of symptoms, sometimes depending on where it is, but also just how the woman's body responds to it. So the most common symptoms that, the two big ones that get flagged everywhere are pain and infertility. They're the two big ones that tend to be, people who find they've got the condition will have usually come from one of those two angles. And in terms of the level of pain and infertility, it can be really quite extreme. The level of pain, I mean, even for myself, I was unable to function daily, unable to go to work. Just the most basic of tasks felt like climbing Everest. It was just hell. And fertility, again, I experienced that side myself personally, and I had to go through a whole journey with that. But there's other symptoms as well. So, as I mentioned, the bowel and bladder are quite common places that it's found. So that can then bring bowel symptoms and gastrointestinal issues, painful movements, go to the toilet, and also these cells, because they increase in size through our hormone cycle, there's a stickiness that can happen which actually pulls organs out of alignment, and that can then cause quite a lot of issues as well. So if it's on the bowel, for example, anytime you're then trying to have a bowel movement, your body is pulling from an organ that is not living where it's supposed to be. You can imagine the issues that go there. A lot of this then is what causes the issues with diagnosis and being gaslit as well, because there's not a nice, easy tick box of symptoms, for one. And the level of symptoms don't always match the level of the disease. So one of the common stats that are said by people like myself trying to bust some of these myths is you can have stage 4 endometriosis, which is the highest level, but have zero pain. And you could have crippling pain and have stage 1 of the disease. Because there isn't a nice correlation between you've got this happens, it makes it really hard to diagnose. It doesn't show up very well on scans. Sometimes it does show up on scans, but many times it does not. So the only way to definitively diagnose it is through surgery. And even then, the surgery, depending on who is performing it, the level of skill and experience with it differs massively. Quite often, for example, if a woman's presenting with pain, a general gynecological surgeon will perform it, and not all of them are endometriosis trained necessarily. So it can get missed even when the correct way of diagnosing it is performed. And because it then has these other issues, which in some ways don't always appear to make the most sense, it can be other avenues are explored. Again, talking about my own experience as an example, well before endo was even put on the table as a possibility, I was diagnosed with IBS, I had my appendix removed, I was also told it was psychological because they couldn't find then something in my bowel that seemed to make sense to it. Like, there's lots of avenues that then mean this confusion occurs in the medical setting well before women even know truly what they've got.
You touched on a few interesting things that were already kind of popping in my mind, and one of them being the connection between the body and the mind, kind of the psychosomatic. That, especially when you were talking about the correlation between, we can see it's a level 1, but the pain is not level 4. We see level 4, but pain is level 1. This kind of a misalignment in correlation often can cause that, we know it in other aspects of the body that people can have scoliosis, sciatica, they can have all sorts of physical deformities and yet feel, again, pain or no pain, or they can have physically no deformities and still feel pain, which again can be misdiagnosed and often is then considered being more psychosomatic, can be considered being more of a trauma response, could be something that is stuck in the body based on what we've been through emotionally and psychologically rather than physically. So I'm curious to know from your experience, we touched on a little bit. I don't want to discard the fact that it's definitely not just psychosomatic, but I'm intrigued by the possible role of, we know that our emotional state, our trauma, our past experiences can affect our pain and perception of our own bodies as well, and can lean more towards us getting an illness or having a disease or having a physical, biological condition versus not having.
Absolutely. So, and it's a really good point to bring up because as you say, the condition is incredibly physical, and scientifically you can see when the right people are looking at it in the right way. There is no doubt it is absolutely a physical condition. And how our mind is, the state of mind that we're in, massively changes how that shows up. And a large part of the work I do also says when and how that comes about as well. So as an example to that point, so many of the women who I speak with who have endo, when I talk about their first menses and how that first period was for them, the amount of times that correlates to a really traumatic time for their first one is above the norm. And there are also, again, other above the norm things that are mind-body related. For example, and there was even a study done on this. There aren't many studies on endo, which is absolutely tragic, but there is a study that shows a higher correlation of women with endometriosis having mother wound trauma than the general population, if you like. So there are these links. And again, there's a large part of the work that I do in that because there's the science part and the non-science part, if you like. On a purely science level, if we have got things stored in our body and our mind from trauma, from inner child pieces, from stress, day-to-day stress even, all of these things create an inflammation, which is well documented in our bodies. Endo as a disease loves inflammation. It's where it thrives. It's where it sits. It's how it builds and builds and gets worse as a condition. So therefore, any moment of connection between those two is going to create this symbiotic relationship where they just get worse and worse. And because then, say, for example, if you're in agony every month from endo, that's certainly not going to help your stress levels either. So it becomes this loop of just worsening for the person who's suffering. And a large part of then where I'd mentioned in the opening of these things I'd noticed that were different for me, some of them were in this mind-body link. So to touch on that briefly, yes, there were things I was doing which were very practical in nature. So I started seeing a difference when I employed two things at once. The first was changing some things in my environment, what and when I ate and how, the types of movement and exercises I was doing, the chemicals in my environment, say. So there's some very physical, practical things that made a difference. And at the same time, I also started doing something that I had no intention of expecting any effect to my endo, which was some personal development work. But I happened to notice that it did affect my endo. And that's what started me down this avenue of how that link is so strong and so symbiotic. The amount of times I work with somebody and I do an inner child work and it will release an amount of their endo, especially for the day-to-day endo symptoms, if you like. So with endo, you tend to have, you'll hear a lot of people talk about their flare days, which will be when the endo particularly kicks off and is rampant. The pain is, 10 out of 10. They're, can't function, all this, they're your flare days, if you like. And then there's the day-to-day normality. And I say that in quote marks because it's definitely not normal to somebody who doesn't have endo, but it becomes your norm. But if your norm is on from a nervous system point of view, again, I talk a lot about nervous system, which is this mix again between science and not. If your nervous system is on because of stress, because you're, a type A, you have grown up in a world that tells you where you believe you're not safe day to day, you'll have suppressed anger, or all of these things, your nervous system is going to be at a level of permanently on, so that when the flare days do come, your starting base point is already well many points higher than anybody else's, and so it will feel worse. That's not to deny that there is a flare happening and that your body is doing something incredibly inflammatory and problematic, but how you feel about it will differ quite considerably. So a lot of the work I do is based around that, changing the other lenses that the disease goes through, so that the impact of it is considerably less. And that does mean, then, does it mean that the work I do means you'll never ever have a flare day in your life? No. Love it to be the case one day, and that's certainly one of the aims, but can't say that. Myself, I had a flare day just before Christmas, having not had one for two and a bit years, which is great. I've not had one for 2 and a bit years, which is amazing, but I still had one, knowing all this stuff. The difference was, despite it being one of the worst flares I had, I was able to bring in the tools that I help others with and go, what else is going on here? And I was able to very quickly identify 2 things that massively affected it. I had just lost somebody very close to me, so I was experiencing incredible grief. And it was also coming up to the anniversary of losing the little one that was part of my own fertility journey. Those 2 massive grief things happening in my psyche at the same time had caused this flare for the first time in years. And I was able, by working on the grief, not on the flare, to reduce the amount of time that was affecting me physically from what would have previously been months before doing all this work into about a week. Now, was that week really tough? Yeah, because I was physically in pain and mentally and emotionally wrung out. But I was able to work with a coach on processing the grief healthily and moving that through my body. And within a week, I was completely pain-free, whereas that level of flare would, prior to doing this work, had knocked me for months and probably put me in A&E and another surgery. And that's the difference. It's not about completely wiping it from your life entirely, although, as I say, I'm always hopeful one day we can. It's about just changing how you are day to day. And, if I can get to a point where only every 2.5 years is a flare, I can live with that.
It's amazing how our emotions impact our bodies, and emotions is something that we are not taught to deal with, to process, to embrace, and to live with. It's very much shun the emotions unless it's sort of the happy joy type of emotion. And yes, you always got to be happy and pleasant, but when there's like a depression or sadness or grief or anger or any of these, hundreds of emotions that we have, it's like, no, don't deal with it, because people get embarrassed for you, or they don't know how to cope with your emotions, that, being on the receiving end of them, or they just don't know what to do. Grief is one of them, is people don't know how to deal with other people's grief. So it's like, oh, don't worry about it, suck it up, or are you done mourning yet, or it's not that bad, or they come up with, you'll get over it, so we are taught to suppress our emotions, and the consequences of suppressing emotions sit in our bodies, sit in our mental health, sit in our physical health. Not everybody has endometriosis, so apologies for not pronouncing it, endo. Not everybody goes to that extreme, but we can look at cancers, we can look at stomach aches, IBS, fibromyalgia, all these sort of chronic illnesses, right down to headaches, depression, just because we are suppressing our emotions. And our emotions are very much part of us, and our emotions are connected to so much. So I love how you are connecting, or have connected, how you feel and the emotions that you have to how your body is reacting, and having, you said, doing the work before, the personal development work, starting, yes, what you were eating, the physical stuff, that's more in control, to looking at who you are, your emotions, your history, your things that you've probably not dealt with, and how you connected the two together. I really love that, because yes, we can control the physical, we can control what we eat, how we eat it, where we get our food from, what chemicals are in our home, what chemicals are not, we have control over that. But how often do we want to sit back and go through all that stuff that we are avoiding like the plague and trying not to deal with? But you really connecting the two, and I really love that. And I'd love to know what sort of made you, or why did you go down that road? Because the more common thing is, okay, what am I eating? What chemicals are in my home, and what chemicals am I eating? What can I get rid of? How can I do it? But not everybody then will go, let me think. How about going down sort of inner child work or any sort of like personal development stuff? I'd love to know what got you thinking that.
I'll take you back to the first moment it clicked for me that there might be something in it. I had gone to a retreat, a personal development retreat, and it was actually a retreat about wealth. So nothing to do with endo, in theory. Although, if you look at energetic body mapping, wealth is held in the stomach by women. So, there's that. But that aside for the moment, theoretically on paper, wealth, endo, nothing to do with each other. And 4 days prior to this retreat, I had undergone one of the many surgeries that I had had for endo. So I was physically still in recovery from this operation. I should not have gone medically on this retreat, but I'm a bit stubborn and I just decided not to tell the doctors. So I went on this retreat. And the way the retreat was set up, it's very much about the mind connection. So because it was about wealth, it was talking about beliefs about wealth and stuff. And the first day is about digging up all of your stuff, in inverted commas. Then you do a workshop of the evening, and then the Saturday is kind of like putting back together with new beliefs and patterns, etc. That's the flow. The first day itself, I was beyond agony. I was on crutches. I was, countdown timing until the next time I could take the painkillers. I was a wreck. And sitting there thinking I really shouldn't have come. And then we did the evening session. The evening session was a active dynamic meditation. And I don't know if you've ever done one of them, but it is essentially, we think of meditation like, sitting cross-legged, going on a journey, the kind of concept, right? But a dynamic meditation, as you can kind of guess from the name, is moving. And you don't stop moving. So a facilitator takes you through particular songs, and as part of their instructions, help you move out of your body, your stuff, if you like. So because it's dynamic and active in its concept, people move a lot. There is stomping up and down, there is screaming into pillows, there's hitting the floor, there's unbelievable wailing to get the full spectrum of emotions, and it's encouraged and facilitated that way. I'd done one of these before with this particular company and knew what to expect. But also physically, because of how I was post-operation, I couldn't do any of the things all the other participants could do. I could barely move. I could barely, literally, I spent the first 20 minutes of this meditation like moving side to side about an inch. And that felt like a lot. So I'm sitting there with my eyes closed, literally just rocking side to side a teeny bit with all these people doing all these great releases around me. And I'm sitting there thinking, well, I ain't going to get a lot out of this, am I? I can't do all the things that's supposed to get all this stuff out of me. This is pretty useless. So I'd sort of resign myself just to sit there and be a good girl for, the next hour, and then smile and nod afterwards and go to bed. In this moment, I had this weird, what I can best describe as almost like an out-of-body experience. Best way I can describe it, because I had my eyes closed, and I could picture as though from the other side of the room. So in my mind's eye, I was seeing myself sitting in this chair, like tiny movements, and then everybody else with their wailing and their punching and their screaming and rah, rah, rah. And something about the juxtaposition of me versus everybody else around me made me hysterically laugh. Because in any other setting, I would look like the normal one, but in this particular setting, I looked really bizarre. I did not fit in. So I proper laughed. And you know that belly laugh where you're crying from the laughter and you don't think you can get your breath back? It was that kind of laughter. And that pretty much was the next, 45 minutes to an hour, just hysterical laughing. So, the session ends and I think, well, at least I got a good laugh out of it, hey ho. Went to bed. Next day, woke up, no pain. Practically skipped down to breakfast, hadn't brought the crutches with me, and even people around me were like, what on earth's going on? Like, what's happening here? And I shared on the mics that morning about this difference and how having, I had this laughing experience and how I feel so different today, blah, blah, blah. And I even remember that it was such a dramatic difference in how I was presenting that I remember one of the participants who, bless her, she was trying to say it so lovely, but you could see she couldn't quite figure out how to say it. She approached me afterwards and was like, don't mean to be rude, Sam, but were you lying about only having an operation 5 days ago? Because it doesn't make any sense. Your story just is illogical. And because it was so soon after surgery, I was able to lift up my top and I still had the surgery bandages on. You could still see, even the yellow iodine that was around the bandages. It was that obvious. And she was like, what? And she just couldn't believe it. And it was, again, being the bit of a geek that I am, in the days following, I really got curious into what on earth was it about laughing like a maniac that changed my symptoms physically? Like, what is that? And it set me down this path of researching and trying to figure out this mind-body connection in a whole different way. And then through the experimentation, that's where I, started working with a coach and noticing and writing down what I was doing on a self-development level and then what was changing for me physically as well. And the understanding I've come to get now, having, done this, this is, gosh, when would that have meditation have been? Probably 7-8 years ago, something like that. No, probably a bit longer than that, possibly getting on for 9 now. So over the years, one of the things that makes sense to me when I put it together, if this was an acting class that we were doing and I said to you, present yourself as somebody who's happy. You're going to change your body physically to show happy. And if I said, okay, now be sad, you're probably going to round your shoulders and drop down a bit and your voice is going to... We can easily see that when we express emotions, our body physiology fundamentally differs massively depending on what emotion we're feeling. And so if we're not expressing that emotion physically and mentally, it is not hard to see how that gets us put in a stuck state. Because if you're angry or sad and these emotions that we don't like to feel, part of you is going to physically brace against it and stay there. It is going to create a tension and whether it's in our muscles or even in our fascia, which connects our entire body together. So when we talk about stored emotions, it doesn't literally mean that there's, a little bit of anger sitting in your little pinky. Conceptually and energetically, yes, but literally, no. And yet we talk about it in that way in this kind of in a coaching space because it's the easiest way to explain it. But essentially, from a physiology point of view, you have stored a way of holding yourself based on something you haven't let go of, and it isn't good for us as humans. We are supposed to feel every array of emotions. There is no bad emotion. There are bad ways of expressing it, perhaps, and absolutely, and we learn how to do that better as we grow up. But there is no emotion that is bad. But the damage that we do to our bodies, whether it is something like endo or just generally when we don't allow those things to process through, is huge. And when you do have a chronic illness, I talk about endo because that was my journey, but I help women with other similar conditions, fibroids, adenomyosis, even IBS, things like that, because I don't require a diagnosis of endo to work with me because the principles apply. if you are suffering from something, there is going to be some amount of holding you're doing that is going to prevent you from being able to express yourself how you want to be in your most authentic way. And therefore it will also be causing a tension and inflammation that's going to be giving you symptoms and challenges physiologically as well.
Well, there's nothing that a good laugh can help with, and you've obviously proven that to yourself. And it's interesting how you said it was hysterical laughter and being still, but it could have been anything. But it's great that you've seen that connection and that process of just releasing something. Because I know that sometimes, especially hysterical laughter, doesn't have to necessarily be something funny that's got you started. It can be just anything random, something even sad. So it's interesting how you processed it through hysterical laughter. And yeah, I had a lovely visual of everybody going around and you just sitting there rocking slightly and then just bursting out into laughter. So thank you for sharing that with us. So you've now done this work, and you said between about 7, 8, 9 years ago, when it started on this journey. So what other, just to help some of our listeners to understand, and they don't necessarily have to have endo to do this work. You said it's anything. I mean, anything where we're suppressing emotions, it's good to do some work. What work do you encourage or work through, and how has that helped? So what can people start to think about looking at? Because not everybody will want to do dynamic meditation. That's something, if you tell me dynamic meditation, I'm going that way. I'm not going towards it. And I know that meditation is not for everybody, and there are different forms, but there's other things that one can do. If you could just share some of the other options that maybe people can look at to process, instead of just whether it's the quiet meditation or dynamic meditation, but just something else that they can help themselves to develop and see how they can start their personal or spiritual journey while they're working on the physical and the stuff they can control.
Yeah, so great question. And indeed, that active dynamic meditation, I do meditations, but not that particular type even. And one of the reasons I set up the methodology that I have got, and in the way that I do it, is to give multiple avenues for people to access something. When I was looking around for things myself to be able to help my own symptoms, I could find somebody who did that one little thing, but I couldn't find somebody who would treat me as a whole person and work on what I needed. So a big part of my intention behind the work is it's tailored to you. Even in something that's more group and generalized, like the membership that I have, it still has the component of being tailored. It's a pick for what is right. And in terms of the what tools and the how, generally, I start through the lens of the first pillar, which is reconnection with the body. It is such a key part to be able to connect the feelings, then the emotions and the physiology, all of those pieces we've been talking about, and the nervous system, all these things, connecting them and how that is showing up for you. But in terms of the how, it ranges everything from coaching, directly. So we'd be talking about sometimes going into the inner child work and trauma, belief patterns, limiting beliefs, all of those pieces through what you would think of as a more traditional coaching way of working. There's also a lot in terms of the somatic side of things. So I help people with breath work. I talk about like a body mapping, so that you can work out what your body is trying to communicate to you, not just that bit hurts, but what is it trying to say and why. So it's almost like a personification of the physical. There's also somatic workshops in a much wider scale. So one of the things I do is an embodiment session, and what that means is for approximately an hour-ish, I will take clients, usually in a group setting, through a variety of movements that are very particularly prescribed, so that something that's stuck emotionally and or physically can move in a different way. And that then, part of that from a science point of view is the fascia and the lubrication of our insides, so that things can move, but also on an energetic and a sort of soul mind level, being able to release stuff that is stuck. And again, those can differ massively in how they are. As an example there, one of the first movements that tends to be covered most classes is walking. And you think, well, why do you need to teach us how to walk, Sam? Well, actually, quite a lot goes into that. Yes, we may have all been walking since we were 2 years old, but the likelihood of us doing that in a way that's not supportive of a healthy body is really high. Especially as women, there is a way that we are supposed to walk that lubricates and moves the joints in a way that is whole body inclusive. And we don't do it. We have learned to walk as robots even. And that causes us to hold this tension and brace against certain things. So there's a wide variety of options. There's a lot of nervous system work I do. One of the things I'm particularly focusing on at the minute is nervous system. So that will be looking at what is triggering you in your environment, from the basic boring stuff like my partner does my head in every time he does this. That's a very practical day-to-day thing, to, gosh, every time I go out the house, I'm scared of why. The very big variety in the what there. But essentially, it's what is it for you that causes something to occur? And in identifying that and then reconnecting with the body, having that dialogue with oneself to understand a lot of the way forward from that. It's also about getting information. So the information piece is key. There is so much misinformation out there about endo. It's one of my biggest bugbears. And so one of the things I also like to do is bring that information, how the difference between different medical settings and what you're able to gain from that, what the difference between ablation and excision is, some of the basics like that aren't well communicated everywhere. Talking conversations like this, making that link for people between the different parts of our body and that more holistic thing. And then there is, the more traditional meditations. So I don't do the dynamic meditation, but I do the traditional meditations, and take people from that who that is supportive of. I also talk about, on a physical level, those sort of very practical tools that I mentioned I also started with. So I do talk about how diet can affect your symptoms and why. How different type of movements are suited depending on where you are in your cycle. Doing a HIIT type workout when you're menstruating, unless you have built up that and you're doing it consistently, not a place to start it, certainly, and for so many reasons. So there's things like that where very practical things, if someone's interested in doing yoga, say, I would be like, great. What I would suggest though is when you're at this point in your cycle doing this type versus 2 weeks later doing this type. And that's why the range of tools is so important, because somebody else who would hate doing yoga, there's no point telling them to do that. It's in the conversation that I see where their preferences lie, because when you tailor something to what somebody is most available to, it's going to have a much bigger interest. In the same way you said, Natalie, the idea of doing an active dynamic meditation would make you run at the door. Me then saying that, that's the only way to cure your endo, would be really counterintuitive and unhelpful. But if the conversation was like, okay, cool, so what do you like to do then? There'd be something in that we could expand on, all about this holistic way of bringing yourself back to a body and an environment, life, day to day, that feels really good.
Some really practical tools in that, and I really appreciate it. And I was just wondering, because you tailor it for your clients and each individual, is there something that works generally for most people, are there like a few bits that somebody who you most probably not spoken to yet and is listening to this, is there something that like practical that they could do? Because I know that endo is very, like you said, very individual and the way you are, but are there some tools that just about anybody and everybody can do, and maybe not even just for endo but for anything else? Is there sort of a few basic tools that they can start implementing while they working on all the other stuff?
Yes, and a lot of them are things that we hear anyway to a large degree. They are things like being really well hydrated, getting enough sleep, and restful sleep. And if that's not happening, looking at why you're not able to do that, rather than pushing through and pretending that you're sleeping when you're really not. Being able to look at your stress levels day to day. That nervous system piece is really key. If someone's nervous system is running the show, there are so many options. If you Googled nervous system tools, there are a bazillion out there. And working on that, even if it's on that very generic, literally pick something off of Google that you like the look of, if it's going to help your nervous system cool down and go into parasympathetic, where we rest, digest, repair, rather than a sympathetic, which is where we react and are constantly on. Those practical things are going to make a big difference. On a diet level, even if you didn't understand all the ins and outs of exactly what's good for your endo, the usual things we hear all the time: more fruit and veg, more variety in our diet, less ultra-processed, less sugar. Sugar, when it comes to endo, has a massive impact because of the insulin part that comes into endo and the way our hormones and our estrogen levels change because of our insulin levels. These practical things to try in the short term are all going to help and certainly not hinder. Individually making a complete dramatic difference from being in a life of absolute unimaginable pain to free and fine again. No, these things alone are unlikely to, because if the solution to that big of a difference was that easy, we'd all have done it. And endo wouldn't be this condition that has so much confusion and misinformation and complexity to it. By nature, the disease is quite individualistic, and that gives some complexity to how we look at it, without a doubt. And doesn't mean there's nothing you can do. All those practical things of looking after yourself, putting yourself first. We don't do this enough, especially as women. We just don't. We put ourselves at the bottom of the pile and then wonder why we're exhausted, running on empty, frazzled, can't function and remember what we've walked into the room for. So all of these things are going to make a big difference in how we can just help our symptoms be that little bit better off.
And anything helps. I mean, any little thing that you do helps. And obviously when they're good for everybody and anything, but obviously when you're dealing with like endo or something, then you have to really start to dig deeper. But all your tools, and we can never hear enough of what to look after ourselves, because I think half the time we forget or we get so wrapped up in life. So thank you for reminding us about some of the things that we can do and helping people to get started, to then maybe start to dig deeper and look further. But we've always got to take that first step and start. So thank you for really sharing some tools and reminding us, yes, sleep is important and what we're eating is important, and, having that proper rest and dealing, not allowing the stress to just take over and, just rule our lives. So thank you for those reminders. So this is where we ask Sam, may we please have your gold nugget?
The biggest thing I would say with endo and other chronic illnesses is recognizing that whole body part of yourself, that connection with your body and how important that is, can't be undervalued. It is it is the only consistent in our lives, right? People come and go, situations come and go, but the body that we're in stays with us. And understanding that is going to give you an ability to change what is happening for you, right? If you're able to go from believing that you're broken, that you're stuck, that life is against you, to thinking that your body and life is with you, you're able to having a view of the world where you're able to access what you want in life, having a curiosity, compassion with yourself, feeling safe in yourself and your environment. All of these things are, for me, what I consider quite basic requirements that we should have and choose to have. Doesn't make them easy without being able to have, help and understanding of various bits, but it's something that we should all have. Because as soon as we know ourselves confidently and comfortably, then, well, literally, I mean, it sounds cliche, but literally anything then is possible, okay, including healing. That was what I'd say, off the top of my head, as the golden nugget is reconnect with yourself, however that looks. And it can, as we've discussed, look so many different ways. But build that up. Get that as a non-negotiable in your life and build on it and get that relationship stronger and stronger and stronger every single day.
And that is a very powerful gold nugget, because that is something that we should have, and it's not a choice, that we should have it and strive for it, because every human is worth it, and therefore it is a very powerful gold nugget. Thank you very much for sharing that. Now, for our listeners, if they think, oh, I need Sam's help, I need to connect with her, I need to find out information, or they just want to know more about what it is that you're doing, or learn more about endo because they're not sure, where can people find you?
So the best options would be my website, which is theendocoach.co.uk. I would say it's a UK-based website, but I work anywhere in the world. Also in the obvious socials, so my Facebook is facebook.com/theendocoach. Also my Instagram is sam_theendocoach. So I try to post quite a lot on there and, respond quite a lot to DMs, so people can always get through that way. And the other thing that it's worth mentioning, I regularly am holding at the moment a free 14-day container that's a private space that you join up and go into a free container, where we specifically look at the nervous system and the role of that and this reconnection with the body that we've just talked about. So that's a good place to be able to access on a sort of free try way of working with me, which should then be able to sign up for the next one, theendocoach.co.uk/14-day-reset, and you'd be able to sign up for whenever the next one is due to come round. I aim to have all these different ways and tools, as I say, is so important to me, because it also then means lots of different ways to access me. Lots of everything from information to the healing, from free to the high prices. There's the range for a reason, because the biggest thing for me, it's not a business I dreamt up one day and thought that'd be really fun. It comes from my own journey of knowing what it's really truly nuts and bolts like to have something like this, and how all consuming it can be. And so for me, my big mission is that 1 million women can be helped with these kind of tools. And so that's why there's lots of different ways to access them.
And I appreciate so much all the free resources, free support, valuable insights you've shared today on this podcast to allow people to, get a little bit more educated and aware that maybe this is something they're struggling with. So obviously all the links that you mentioned will be down in the description below, so people can click and find you wherever they seem to want. Thank you so much for today. It was really insightful. But here on the podcast, we're always trying to squeeze in few last questions. We want always a little bit more of the good juice. And because the podcast is all about, finding ways to live happier, healthier, more fulfilled life, as we call it, to lean in more into your life, I'm curious, what gives you life right now?
So for me, it is a mixture of the personal and professional. So on a personal basis, I do have two beautiful children and my amazing husband. So that allows me to have fulfillment on a home level that just lights me up. You know, they are my world. They are what matters to me. And because it's the spending time with them. To me, a more fulfilled life isn't about doing more. It's from feeling connected to yourself and other people and enjoying the moment that you're in. So that's a big part of it. And then professionally is, you know, doing this sort of work, having these conversations with lovely people like yourself and with clients to enable them to have access to their version of the fulfillment. That's what lights me up as well, then, in that professional sense of, you know, coming off a conversation and a woman saying, you know, I had this the other day on a beautiful comment, I've never felt more seen ever in my entire life. Like, receiving a comment like that as a coach, there is no words to put into how beautiful that is to receive as a gift back, you know, because I know that things are going to change for her. So a mixture of the two, the things that give me the home base and the things that light me up, as well as seeing what happens for others.
Thank you so much for being here with us today, for sharing your journey. I have learned a lot. I've heard of endo, but that's about it. You've really sort of opened my eyes to more to it, and so a bit more beyond, oh yes, I've heard of that. And hopefully you have opened the eyes and ears of our listeners and viewers to really get more of an understanding. And maybe I know a lot of women go undiagnosed because they just think it's bad period or something. So hopefully this has got them thinking, oh, maybe this is something I need to look into and all that. So thank you so much for sharing your time with us, sharing some tools, some really practical tools, and just, you know, allowing women to find a space where they can get help and to help themselves. So thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Now, for our listeners, this has been quite a serious topic, but it's been done in a really gentle and lovely way. We would love to know, is endo something that you struggle with, or you know somebody who does? Is it something that you've never ever heard of? But whether you have or haven't, we would love to know, what aha moments have you got from today? What have you learned from today? There's always something we can learn. We do not have to have endo in order to learn something new. So we would love to know. And if you have had endo or do have it, we would love to know your journey and what you've done to help yourself and how your journey has looked for you. But until next time, we'll talk to you soon. Bye.